Good afternoon. I'm Michael Williams, the Distinguished Leader in Residence here at the University of North Texas at Dallas. Welcome to the second installment of UNT Dallas Responds, Changing the Narrative, a multi-generational approach. We appreciate you being with us. We expect it to be an interesting hour. It is now my opportunity to bring before you the president of the University of North Texas at Dallas, Mr. Bob Mung.
Thank you. I'm mindful on this day that we are being confronted by three crises simultaneously: a global pandemic and the resulting economic fallout, and the persistent police brutality and structural racism that we face today. And I believe, as many of you do, that all three are deeply entwined. Our purpose today is to get beyond the platitudes and work together, dig in together to see a way forward for constructive action. The conversation is entitled Changing the Narrative, a Multi-Generational Approach. This refers to the fact that under our UNT Dallas banner, 5 different generations populate our campus, and each are important contributors to our success. We are one university with a powerful mission to increase educational attainment in urban Metro Dallas. No other university is so local. No other university has made the strides UNT Dallas has in providing local students with a way forward into local careers at a living wage. But our students don't want to accept the status quo. They want to change the narrative by reshaping the world into something more just and equitable. A world where racism isn't accepted, a world where it isn't where you start out, but one in which you live in an era of equal opportunity to succeed and thrive. To change the narrative, all of us have to get closer to the problems that exist in our society. To address those problems, we can't become cynical. We have to work hard, and we get more done working together than working alone. So I look forward to today's discussion, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you before this event.
President Mung, thank you. Our format for today's conversation is fairly simple. 45 minutes of conversation between myself and the panelists, and then 15 minutes to give you an opportunity to ask us questions. Your questions can be posted on the chat feature on here on Teams. You know, this is entitled a narrative, and the narrative is just simply a story. It's a story about people, places, and events. Some of those are powerful stories, some are endearing stories, some are inspiring stories, and some are stories that are painful. For a few minutes, we're going to delve into some of the narratives about race and equity and safety, social justice and liberty. It's our belief that a key to changing America's future lies in changing to the narrative about who we are and the past that we share. Jennifer Davis Lam has been with the Caruth Police Institute at the University of North Texas at Dallas since 2008. In her time there, she's built programs that emphasize the value of education, leadership, and academic and community partnerships in public safety organizations. She has designed and taught courses on implicit bias and procedural justice. She earned a master's degree in criminal justice from the University of North Texas and has done research in police research, education, and consulting for the last 20 years. Jennifer, 526 seconds. In less time than it takes to boil an egg. America was forced to deal with a painful story, an all too repeated story. It's the narrative of the racist, abusive cop. And in the 18 days since George Floyd's tragic death, protests have erupted in 350 cities across the country. We have seen the National Guard deployed in 23 states. We've seen 15 some odd cities have curfews, all with people protesting because they're demanding justice for Mr. Floyd's family and for us to reimagine police conduct and policing. When I said that this is a narrative about racist, abusive cops, is that accurate? And if so, how do we change it?
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. So this is a subject that we could honestly do a semester-long class and then some. The narrative about policing right now, of course, we all know is not a particularly positive one. And here's the thing about perception and policing. If the community that you serve has a perception of you as being a racist and power-hungry law enforcement entity, then that is the community's reality. And in cases where that perception is backed up by videos of people like George Floyd losing their lives or protesters being assaulted by officers, it really becomes hard to push back against that narrative. And let me clarify what I'm saying about the perception being the reality. Policing in the United States is based on, theoretically, consent. So we, as a people, consent that this law enforcement organization is something that we're going to entrust with taking away a person's liberty. So taking away a person's liberty in some cases, even by using force, and we consent to that on some level. And in some cases, even taking their lives. Again, that's a contract that society enters with law enforcement agencies. So, and we consent to that if we agree that these people who are having their liberty taken away are a danger to our community. Okay. So we consent to that based on a couple of other things, which is that the power to take away liberty is based on fairness, transparency, and accountability. So we say we entrust you to do these things, but it has to be fair. It has to be applied evenly. It has to be based, we have to be able to see into your inner workings and understand the reasons that you're doing these things, and you have to be accountable to the community when you do these things, okay? So when we have fairness, transparency, and accountability in policing, then the public consents to, removing liberty from people that we see as dangerous to our society. But when we don't have those things, when we don't have the levels of fairness, transparency, and accountability, then you start to see a pattern of what's called delegitimization. So we are not seeing this entity as legitimate in their use of force, in their use of, removing liberty to people, from people. So, and we don't uniformly feel comfortable that the police should be empowered to strip a person of his or her liberty in these cases. So further, when that happens, we start to question the public value of police organizations, which is what is happening right now and what we're seeing very loudly and very clearly across the country. We're starting to hear questions about, is this the role that we want police organizations to play in our society? What is the role going to be in the future? How are they funded? And those types of questions are coming up because of all these issues around fairness and transparency. Okay, I think this time, we've had this before. We had this in Ferguson, Missouri. In fact, to the point that that's a buzzword in policing. Post-Ferguson is a marker in policing. It's supposed to be a marker of when all of these reforms were enacted, and when police organizations really started to focus in on those accountability and fairness and transparency issues. Okay, so this has happened before, and agencies promised to put in a lot of work around reform, and to really start asking questions about their roles in communities. I think it's really clear right now that the questions have become more profound. We didn't hear this widespread call for defunding police and in some cases abolishing police right after Ferguson, Missouri. And I think that's because it's become clear to a lot of people that there is something wrong with the narrative around American policing. Okay. And the question now is, how do we deal with that? We have this generation of activists that are not going to let this go, and rightfully so. And that's a good thing, because policing has come against systemic barriers for a very long time to putting real reform in place. Systemic barriers. And what that means is, while there are individual officers out there who have joined police forces for absolutely the best reasons, and there are officers out there who are capable of reform and who are capable of doing the type of work that communities want them to do, the problem is more deep-rooted. It's deep-rooted in the history of policing, and this feeds very strongly into that narrative. From the times of slavery to the use of police to safeguard property in America's early cities, from these perceived threats of immigrants, to the use of police to enforce Jim Crow laws and crack down on civil rights activists. Those things have carried with police agencies and have carried through the narrative to now. Additionally, there are a lot of issues that are deep-rooted in the culture of policing, and we all know that culture eats literally everything else for breakfast. So we know that as much as police agencies want to reform themselves, and we have some very progressive chiefs who have tried very hard to do good work around reform, when you butt up against these cultural issues, it makes it very difficult to put reforms in place. Okay, again, we've been reform-minded, I think, in the policing community for at least since Ferguson, and even a little bit before then, truly. But that was supposed to be a paradigm shift that brought in all these community police dialogues and implicit bias trainings and use of force policies, and yet here we are again. We're still facing the same issues. A lot of people were really horrified at how the police handled a lot of the protests over the past few weeks, and I think it's really clear that even in trying to implement these new policies and approaches, policing still fails to put racial equity front and center as it thinks through reform. It still fails to do that. It still over-polices Black communities in some areas. It still treats Black citizens differently. And it's still really uncomfortable with confronting bias, whether that's explicit or implicit, in its ranks.
Jennifer, thank you. I find it interesting, and I appreciate the fact that you started your response by finding the bases of liberty. And because that is someplace where across the political spectrum, individuals can agree, whether one is a conservative, one is a liberal, or whatever. The effort to advance the goal of individual freedom and individual liberty as sort of the thrust of what we want to do, I think is something we can all agree upon. Let's move on to the other side of that coin that we're talking about. Nikia Douglas is the founding executive director of TRIO and our pre-collegiate programs here at UNT Dallas. In this role, he works collaboratively with members of the university school districts, business, and local community to create engaging, non-traditional educational experiences for students. Prior to his current work, he was executive director of the South Oak Cliff feeder pattern in Dallas, and is also, I think, probably best known as the founding principal of the Barack Obama Male Academy. Nakia, I want to ask you about the other side of that coin. You know, when I entered college in 1971 in Los Angeles, it was shortly after the Watts riots. And the NAACP and other community-based organizations took it upon themselves to teach us as young men what to do if the police stopped us. We were told to put your hands if you were the driver at 10 and 2. We were told if you were a passenger in the car to keep your hands where they could be seen. We were told do not move and make a quick move or a furtive move in some kind of way. All of which was to make sure that we did not feed into a narrative about us as an angry Black man. So I want to ask you about that narrative, about an angry Black man. Is that the way we're looked at, you think, by the outside world? And if so, what do we do and how do we go about the business of changing that?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this. When we think about changing the narrative, we have to change the story. Just a simple example for everyone. When we look at the use and the utilization of our armed guards, our National Guard, and our police force in regards to the current protests that are going on, it has been very hostile. When we look in places like Michigan, when there were citizens that were armed with AR and other rifles, it wasn't the same effort. So the narrative is one that, while policing is the main focus and topic right now, systemically racism has existed within our country since our inception. Whether it's policing, whether it's education, whether it's housing, our judicial system, medical, financial, political process, just government in general. It's worked for those it's meant to work for. And unfortunately, it hasn't always felt like it was built to work for us as African Americans. As we've now gained our rights, as we've now are now understood and seen as a part of our human race, let alone a part of our country. Our responsibility as educators are to enlighten our students and to enlighten the community abroad to these travesties, but ultimately create forums like this where we can discuss them so that we can correct them. Riots, protests are a form of communication when you're going unheard. We took a knee. Colin Kaepernick was blackballed for that. Our students have protested silently. They've submitted resolutions. They've signed petitions. It's only so long you can go without hearing us. And so in this instance, our people are hurting, our country is hurting, our world is hurting. And we're not just talking about systemic racism here within our own country, we're talking about the world abroad. It's a travesty what's happening, but this is the only way we're going to heal. And as uncomfortable as it is, as uncomfortable these conversations will be and continue to be, they're necessary.
Thank you, Nakia. You know, it's interesting when you talk about the frustration, because these protests do indeed rise out of frustration and despair. Another part of that is that we know that there is something at the end of that tunnel. We look at other movements that started. You know, you think about there was a time when we did not as a country pay much attention to the guy who got in his car after having had a few drinks at the bar and was driving down the street. But then Mothers Against Drunk Driving started a movement. And now we take that activity a whole lot more seriously than we once did. There was a time when a wife or a girlfriend would call the police and say that the male in that house had abused her. We may not have taken that as seriously. That is no longer the case today. A movement was started out of frustration and out of despair. Let's stay with educators for a second and move to Dr. Sabrina Hodge. Dr. Hodge is the supervisor of the Trailblazer Elite program at UNT Dallas, and one of four, I think, of this panel that is a native of the city of Dallas. She graduated from Townview Magnet Center in the Law Magnet and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in business from Prairie View A&M University and a master's degree from Texas A&M University at Commerce, as well as a doctorate degree from Texas A&M Commerce. Sabrina, you spent 11 years at the Young Men's Leadership Academy with young men 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, about 900 of them. And it's unfortunate that those young men, about the same age as Tamir Rice and Tyree King and Jorge Tapia, all of whom lost their life at the hands of a police officer. And many people suggest that, and the research will indicate, that when police officers see young Black men, they typically see a young man that they think in their mind is bigger than he actually is, and he's more aggressive than he probably is. And so that narrative of that young, aggressive Black kid persists. If that's correct, can we change it? And if so, how?
Well, I appreciate the invitation to be on this panel for this conversation. Working with all males was beautiful to me. I see the beauty, I see the resilience in young men who are trying to persist to become the best versions of themselves. And they have to grow up in a society that looks at them as a target. So it's disheartening to walk into a building every day knowing that you have to pound into a young male, a Black male, and say, you are somebody, you are courageous, you are strong. It shouldn't be that way. They should know that they are resilient, but society has a mark on them. And I've interviewed young men and they've told me, I already have one strike against me. And I say, what is that? I'm Black. And that's disheartening. So they have to come to school and we have to motivate them on a daily basis. And as an educator, it's sad that we have students that are going to school and being told that they're not going to be anything. That sticks in their head. So I don't feel that they are aimless. I don't feel that they're aggressive. I don't feel that they're angry. Black young boys are traumatized. They are stressed. They are hurting, but they are told to hold their emotions inside so they can't express it outwardly. I worked in an area where students had to be an adult in their household sometimes. They have families, mothers and fathers that are working 2 and 3 jobs, and they have to make sure that they're caregivers for their younger siblings. So with that, they may come to school tired the next day. That student isn't lazy. That student is just tired. So one of the things that I am saddened about is there's not enough implicit bias training for teachers. Teachers come to certain neighborhoods and teach in certain schools with biases. Oh, I work at a low performing school, so this student only has a 1-parent household. That may not be the case. So we have people that are coming with biases of Black students, and it's not okay. One of the things, we don't look at Black teenagers as children. They are not allowed to grow up and play and be children. They are put in situations where they're already, we might have a big, tall young man who's 200 pounds, 6'4", and he's looked at as an adult, but he's a child. So one of the things I also learned is in certain communities, there are not enough resources for mental health. Students are dealing with trauma in their family. They're dealing with parents who are depressed, but they don't know how to cope with those things. Because in the Black community, even in my household, nobody talked about going to therapy. That wasn't something that came up. And we have to teach the Black community, it is okay to seek help and get therapy. We need programs in the Black community that are going to address those issues. Prime example, and I'll give this example. My godson is a bright young man. He just turned 8.
And he goes to a school and they wanted to label him as a special education child. They said he had discipline issues. I had to go to the school and just try to figure out what was going on. Wasn't a discipline issue. The curriculum was not up to date. So we have children in schools where the curriculum is being watered down, and also we are not teaching students at the level of expectation that they should be, or resilient. Don't water down the curriculum, make them rise to the occasion. So, you know, if we are putting Black students in schools that are not having a curriculum that is rigorous enough, they are going to fail. The achievement gap for Black children is disheartening. 12% of the students graduating from high school in Dallas passed, AP and IB exams, only 12%. So 84% of them are graduating, but only 12% of them are known to be college and career ready. That's a problem. So Black children aren't aimless. Black young males aren't aimless, and same thing with young women. They need to be mentored. We need mentoring programs at every level. I hate to call it out, but that UNTD has a racial equity department. They took away the African-American Student Success Initiative. I don't know why, but that is something that is needed in schools, male mentoring programs. There also needs to be empathy training. We have to be able to be empathetic and sympathetic to situations that are going on, because in the Black community, there are different things. In the Pleasant Grove community, students are seeing people being killed and have to come to school, and nobody is addressing those issues. Nobody's saying anything to them. We don't even have enough, we don't have psych services in schools. Psych services needs to be a part of the counseling teams in schools. We have counselors, but they're doing schedules all day. How are they counseling kids who are traumatized if they're just doing schedules? Do they receive enough training? And also, we talk about restorative practices. We're not doing restorative practices enough in class or enough in schools. In August, teachers have a professional development of restorative practices. For the first 6 weeks, it is expected to be implemented, and after that, it goes away. There has to be ongoing strategies, restorative practices, implicit bias trainings, also empathy trainings, also policing in schools. We have to do better. There are situations where police, they are arresting children for assaults when they are play fighting. 2 Black males play fighting because one receives a scratch on his face or his arm. Now it's classified as an assault. That wasn't an assault. That was 2 young men that were playing. But who took the time to talk to those students about this? But the officer just wants to arrest the student. And now, as a Black male, I have an assault on my record. When I try to apply to a job at McDonald's at 16, I get denied for the job. Oh, you have an assault on your record. They can't explain that there was force playing. So now they have 2 strikes against them. I'm Black and I have something on my record. So what we have to change it at the top. We have to put more funding into programs, mentoring programs. So that's why I love being at UNT Dallas. The Trailblazer Elite program is a program designed to help students who need the extra attention. We need to give Black and brown students extra care and extra attention. I'm not saying white students don't need the extra care and attention, but Black and brown children need exposure. They need opportunities, and they need someone who cares. And my last thing, and I know I'm kind of all over the place because my emotions have been very high. Last week was very hard for me because it's just, as an educator, I was just trying to figure out what is my role and what do I do next. And it's hard. You have to get up and try to be the best version of your own self and try to work through this pain, because this is pain and this is trauma that we're feeling. So we have to teach our Black boys to be resilient. I want people to stop looking at Black boys as targets and look at them as children, as young men, as they are who we think they are. But we have, like Nakia said, we have to create the story. We have to change the story. We have to let them know who they are and what they can become. Until we do that, people will continue to say, oh, Black boys are lazy. No, they're not lazy. Black boys are aggressive. No, they're not aggressive. Black boys are traumatized. No. We have to teach children when they don't get their way. Now, with some white students, they will talk to them. But with Black students, they're going to be sent to the office. The discipline and suspension to prison pipeline, that's where it starts. The more you suspend a Black kid, the more they stop coming to school. They don't want to go to school anymore. Now they're not engaged. They become disengaged because now they feel like that you don't want them there. And I walked in on a teacher who said, those children. I had to address that. What children? Who are those children? You are teaching those children. And I flat out told the teacher, I don't think you can work for me anymore. I think it's best that you might find you a new job. And I'm just that transparent. You can't work for me seeing those children. And this was a white teacher. You can't do that because you're in front of those children every day. If I can't leave my kid in your classroom, you can't teach my child. I'm sorry. Because our children should have equal opportunity. No Black male should feel like that they're in front of a teacher who's going to demean them and diminish them every day that they walk through that door. We have teachers who are saying, this student assaulted me. No, he didn't assault you. You were in his space. He's trying to get out of the way. Sometimes we don't understand until we read and understand Black children. There are plenty of books. There are plenty of things, but we can't continue to, first it starts, you got to just think about this. There was a commercial of a young Black boy who walks into an office and they asked him, was he lost? Did he need any help? He looked up, he didn't say anything for about a minute. Black doctor comes over, he asks him, what's the problem? He said, can you help me get this off of me? He said, can I help you get what off of you? He raises his shirt up and there's a target. Black doctor says, son, that can't be removed. So we have to change the narrative. We have to change the story because that can't continue to happen. So that's how I feel about it. And I'll end with Rita Pearson. Children can't learn from people who they don't like and they know they don't like them. So.
Dr. Hodge, thank you. I feel almost as if we need to pass the plate. But I really appreciate your comments. Let me just mention about a couple of them. One of them I wrote down in terms of the curriculum, that we need one that is intellectually rigorous and coherent. It's multicultural, social and justice oriented, culturally relevant. That would be a curriculum I think that all of us could be proud of. You know, it's interesting, in preparing for today, I happened to be on Facebook and I saw the post of the former superintendent from Houston Independent School District. And you mentioned about police officers in schools. Notice this, 1.7 billion students have police in their schools, but no counselor. 3 million have police, but no nurse. 6 million have police, but no psychologist. 10 million have police, but no social worker. There's a need for a change. You mentioned, I also have to comment on about the restorative discipline. And as you know, when I was commissioner, I was able to find $2 million to give to the education service centers around the state to teach restorative discipline, in the hope that we will reduce the number of young men, particularly men of color, who are suspended from class because we know that every moment that they're outside in the trailer or outside or at home, they're not learning. And so hopefully we'll learn a whole lot more as a state about restorative discipline and start implementing it. Let's keep on going. We've talked about officers. We've had a conversation about men and young boys. And let's look at now the community in which we live in. You know, Matt Houston is the principal of MLH Enterprises, which is a Dallas-based firm. They provide education, professional development, and leadership consulting to organizations across the country. Matt is very proud, as I am, that he has some of his clients include the Nelson Mandela Foundation, KIPP Charter School System, Centurion America, and others. Matt is an instructor here at UNT Dallas in entrepreneurship and leadership. And it's his desire to drive change, specifically in the area of economic equity for all, is his personal mission. Matt, let's go to something that the research tells us. Mm-hmm. The research tells us that the race of a place matters in police behavior. Improving the material condition of people lessens the likelihood that they will come into contact with a police officer, and thereby reduces the likelihood that they will be involved in some kind of police abuse. So when we look at the lack of access to capital and economic opportunities that Black Americans have had, help us understand historically what efforts have been made to improve communities where the narrative in the community is one of despair and hopelessness and poverty. Help us understand that.
Well, thank you very much to President Mong, UNT Dallas, for having this forum. The Honorable Michael Williams, with your leadership, not only at this school but here in our society, and our panelists. This is not a brand new scenario or situation. We've dealt with this discussion since the inception of our country. In 1776, when we decided to rebel against the colonies and to start our own country, capitalism was the unit of government that we decided to move forward with, to have an economic ecosystem. Why is that important? Because capitalism is built on something that Jennifer spoke on earlier, trust. And when you have trust, you're able to grow as a nation. And at that time, in our inception, African Americans, people of color, and I'll include the indigenous people as well, did not have say at all to our fate. And so from that beginning, started these negotiations through our history. And as years progressed, we would have another way of revolting, which I would like to quote Nakia Douglas, in that revolting is a form of communication when other levels of methods of negotiating is unsuccessful. And that happened during the Civil War. During the Civil War, now we have people who are supporting the slaves in terms of trying to create a system that our whole country is not going to say that a person that looks Black or the person that is Black or one drop of Black blood is inferior of a man or a woman or a child. That was resolved as well in 1863 to where we went from zero participation 100 years earlier to maybe a small, minute say-so. We move on to 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson, where it's separate but unequal. There's another fight. We go again through Jim Crow laws. We go to 1954, Brown versus Board of Education. That's another fight. We go into the 60s with the Civil Rights Movement. That's another fight. If you notice, all of these incremental situation scenarios, there was a boil over of discontent because Blacks feel, and we had data points to show inequitable and unequal practices that we were promised. And so what type of things have happened in our country, to answer your question, there's been consistent communication with our people to provide us the American dream. And every time we come to the table and there is an agreement, we feel that there's all that our country breaks it. And when you initially see that you're not getting the good end of the deal, you try to renegotiate. And we've done that through our organizations, the Urban League, especially in terms of workforce education, the NAACP, who focuses on policy and legal support, the National Negro Business League, which helped spawn the Dallas Negro Chamber of Commerce, was the business and economic aspect of that. Whenever there's something that's unjust that's happening in our community, it's up to us to try to create a system to replace that or fix it. And our community always starts rationally first, and that's through our relationships. Secondly, we resort to civility. We may not want equal rights, but we just want to at least have rights that allow us to survive and move forward and renegotiate. Once we realize that's not an option, then we grow concerned. We start protest. We start writing to our representatives or create types of functions to show our displeasure. After that, we will physically show dissent. That's Colin Kaepernick with the knee. All of these are levels that our community have communicated with our country since its inception. And so when people see rioting as this catastrophic event, people should understand this is just the next level so that we can be heard. And that happens all across the board. And I think it's important for all Americans to know and understand that, because once people realize that rioting isn't a one-time act, that it's just one level of communication that we're trying to relay, then that could put all citizens in the context of, well, what am I doing wrong so that they're not doing this? And that's why I am very excited about what's happening today. I'm very discouraged. It's been very taxing on me emotionally, mentally, as a Black man, as a person who's head of a household, who has people who are depending on him. If I have to practice a different set of rules than my white male peer counterpart just to survive, then my family automatically have a lower lid of fulfilling the American dream. And what we want to do, what we want to ensure, is that African Americans, people of color, Black people, Black men, Black women, are able to hear, we're able to express our concern, we're able to negotiate, and then ensure that we get the American dream.
Matt, thank you. I'm going to sort of take a moment of personal privilege for a second and do something that I did not tell you I was going to do, and go back to Jennifer. Jennifer Davis Lam, I want you to respond to part of the context of the question I asked Matt. If we had in, let's say, the southern quarter of Dallas County, East Austin, Fifth Ward, communities where Black folks lived that looked more like communities where some other folks live, do you think that by itself might change the incidence of police misconduct that we see that happen in Third Ward, East Austin, South Dallas?
So do you mean from a socioeconomic perspective?
Correct.
I think that's hard to say. I mean, we've seen instances where people of color who were professors who had gone into Whole Foods, were targeted. There's dozens of stories that are similar, and I think it goes back to, again, sort of confronting bias in policing, and really, as Dr. Hodge said, in education and in, a number of different spheres as well. And really, thinking through what those biases mean for the way we interact with our communities, and how to mitigate those biases. And again, racial equality has not really been at the forefront of even discussions about bias. I will share that having taught implicit bias classes for police for several years now, we do program evaluations after we're done, and I have received back multiple evaluations and multiple personal pieces of feedback that say, if you could just not talk about race, this would be much better. Because there's this perception that if you go in and you talk about race, then, people immediately raise their hackles. Well, that's sort of the point. And if we can't confront that particular issue, then it doesn't matter, how many opportunities people of color have, or, what the neighborhoods look like, or what color people's skin are. We have to confront those issues. And it needs to be at the forefront of designing any sort of education or programming.
Jennifer, you do not know how much I appreciate that response. I think back when I am moving around, moving about, that officer that may stop Victor and myself, he doesn't know that I'm in his children's history book. He doesn't care. And so there I am, sort of like the person that I asked Nakia about, that black man that he may perceive to be an angry black man. Let's keep going. We're sort of at a very interesting point now. Mr. Ortega, Jorge Ortega, is a junior here at the University of North Texas at Dallas. He's majoring in psychology, and he is a member of the inaugural cohort of Trailblazer Elite, from an immigrant family, and understands the promise of America. And so, Jorge, I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to apologize in part, but as I do it, I'm part of the baby boomer generation. We are proud of our social activism. We go back to how we fought to end the war in Vietnam, and how we fought to stop apartheid in South Africa, and how we were the people who were the transition between the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. And we kind of think that anything that came behind us just is not as socially active as us.
Right.
We think you're socially apathetic. But then I have to look out on the television and see what's going on in the streets with the young folks. And so let me ask this question. Are young people engaged socially and politically? Are you committed to changing the narrative about America and working for its betterment? And are you prepared to tell us old fogies just to go?
Right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Here, let me take these off then. So that's an interesting point that I was going to talk about. Like the activism and the level of engagement that teenagers, that young people have nowadays. I would say it's like miles less than, like the older generations, but it's weird too, because we have this stigma where, we're not socially or politically committed to anything, but then as I see it, like a lot of the people who have been at the protest and at the demonstrations have been young people. Most of the people that have been speaking out on social media, you have your celebrities, but near 90% of all the people I know on social media, like were saying something. They were advocating. They were putting themselves out there. So it's really weird that we have this stigma where we don't vote. We're not committed, but yet in this crucial matter, and this is like this is a matter that definitely deserves it, like the fight for equality and like the the Black Lives Matter movement. It definitely deserves, you know, young people finally step up. But I think that, I guess when it comes down to it, I think we are committed, but definitely not to the extent that the older generations might have been back then, because there's a lot of social loafing, you know, my vote doesn't count, my voice, you know, if I post this on social media, it's not going to count as much. So I definitely think there's a little bit of gray area. And then what were the other components of your question, sir?
Well, I mean, I think you're touching on, I want to know, do you believe that this generation is as committed? And committed for the long haul is really where I am. And what do you see as the future? What do you see your future looking like?
Mm-hmm. So for the long term, I'm kind of mixed on it. I really wish like all this energy would just continue, and it would never stop, so that we can push for it. But you know, I'm afraid that we're gonna go back to that apathy. You know what I'm saying? I'm afraid we're gonna go back to that. However, like, I know there's always going to be people that will always push. You know, they're not happy with where the nation is at right now. They're not happy that the nation or the justice system is not living up to the foundations that the country was built upon, and they want to get to that point because the younger generations, you know, they see all this hate, they see all this you know, discrimination and everything. And for me, from speaking from experience, I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't understand why it's like this. So if there's something that we can do to change it, I'm really hoping that, you know, we all push for it. You know, like for me, if I could, I'd be out there all day. I really, really would. But you know, as Mr. Williams, you know, commented, I'm not in the best, because of citizenship status, I'm not in the best position to sort of put myself out there in the crosshairs of, you know, government agencies. But you know, I'm really hoping that energy just continues on for the long term, because united, we're gonna get stuff done. Like, we really are. That's what this entire demonstration, that's what this entire movement is showing.
Well, I hope you remember that you are the change. And if no one can do it, it's really you. And you're the ones who can do it. But you're also going to get some help. I mean, you've got folks that have spoken before you that are in this fight for the long haul. And there will be institutions that I think are now coming on board to be in this fight as well. So let's talk about an institution. Let's talk about higher ed and the role that higher ed can play. Cynthia Perez is the external director, or the director of external affairs here at the University of North Texas at Dallas. She manages programs and partnerships in support of the mission of the university. And we're going to spend a good bit of time talking about the mission of the university. She served as a classroom teacher and a high school counselor, and in building programs that provide access to students. Cynthia, we're going to talk about higher ed and institutions. Institutions have often been criticized for being disconnected from the community. And the comment has been that they've been insensitive. And that is sort of a recurring narrative about some institutions. Is there a role for higher education to dispel the narrative of being disconnected and insensitive to issues of race and social justice and equality? And have you seen a university, have you seen examples of universities being so engaged?
Hello, Commissioner Williams. First of all, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this panel, and thank you for your time, and to the other panelists. It's an honor to serve on this panel with you. So I do want to talk a little bit about UNT Dallas and our position in the community and what we're currently doing to help change the narrative. So we're involved on multiple partnerships, and we're very strategic in our partnerships and purposeful. We align our work to the strengths and the needs of our community and that community of Southern Dallas. And we work very closely with partners to advance economic opportunity for students and for our community and close that educational gap. We talked a little bit about Trailblazer Elite, and I wish we could have the whole hour to talk about these wonderful programs, but I will talk about Trailblazer Elite. It's for UNT Dallas students, and it helps with keeping them in school with retention and providing services to ensure that they graduate and that they're successful in the workforce. Nakia Douglas's program is Upward Bound in Trio, and they work with high school students and our UNT Dallas students as well to students with disadvantaged backgrounds to make sure that they provide programming and outreach to ensure that they're successful in school. We also have several programs and several partnerships with MAIL initiatives, particularly Project MAIL and the Fellowship Initiative with Big Thought that support the inclusion and educational success of males, particularly African American males. And we feel that as a university, we have an obligation to our community we serve. And I say obligation because it is our obligation to work with our community and serve our students. And we're uniquely positioned to do so. And we're still young enough to be able to respond to our community's needs. I do invite students and our community and even staff and faculty members who don't know about our current partnerships and everything we're doing to support our community to learn and to ask us about them, but also to tell us how we can improve, tell us how we can do better, tell us where you see those gaps. We have other initiatives we're currently working on, and President Mon can always speak more to these than I can. One is bringing a Center for Socioeconomic Mobility on campus. Another one is working with partners to bring an integrated health clinic to Southern Dallas with access to mental health services, which are needed, particularly in our community. And then we're also working on another initiative called Spark Point, which is a financial services center that provides financial education in the form of helping students and community members, families understand how to build their credit, how to reduce debt, how to increase their income. So these are just some initiatives that we're currently working on. But I like I said, I invite you to ask us how we can, ask us about these programs, but also tell us how we can do better and how we can improve. We have an amazing faculty, staff, administration, cabinet that we're open to ideas, and we all work closely together and with our community partners to make sure that we provide educational, economic, and economic opportunities for our community. So those are just some of the programs we're currently working on.
Thank you, Cynthia. We are just a breath away from the end of the 1 o'clock hour, but I do want to go to one question that has been asked of us. What would we say to our white friends about this fight and how they can or ought to be engaged in it? I'll pose it to any one of you.
Well, this is Matt Houston. I like to take a stab at it. One, accept it in a non-traditional form that they're used to hearing Black people talk about race. I think the difference today than maybe a year ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, is that African Americans post-integration historically have been a token, been tokenized in terms of giving the breadth of Black information, racial incidences. One person is a monolith to all of white America to talk about what Black people think. That is not the right approach at this point, because one, no culture is a monolith. Two, That's just insensitive in this space. As we realize historically, that solution doesn't work. And so what I propose and suggest is one, identify and understand that Blacks are hurting at this point. And when you realize someone who you want to get information from is hurting, you are patient and you're empathetic with them. So practice empathy, practice a space where you form a comfortable space, not a perfect space, but a comfortable space. Secondly, allow us our imperfections when we describe it to you, because this is emotional, and this is quite honestly unique. We're not used to having the stage to have the full breadth of how we're feeling, and so give us some grace on that time. And then thirdly, which is the most important thing, is don't leave what we tell you at that table. You need to absorb it, try to understand it, and then move forward with follow-up conversations. This is not a one-time solution. You're not going to be able on a Friday say, I'm going to call Matt Houston and ask the state of Black people. And then once I receive this 2-hour response, I'm happy. And I don't have to ask for another 10 years. Or it's your frame of your point of reference of your cocktail party. Let's try to figure out a new system to learn how each one of our cultures work. Because as you're doing that, your questions and your inquisitions actually spark questions in me that I didn't know about your culture. And so that's how we organically build.
As we close, allow me to thank President Hmong for calling this conversation, for each of you as panelists for being a part of it, and for those of you who are listening and watching for being here with us. You know, we changed the narrative in a very simple way. We change that story by telling it often, telling it loud, telling it clearly. May the peace of the Lord be with you. God bless you. See you around campus.